I know we'll continue to have people filing in as this meeting was set to begin over an hour ago. But I first wanted to thank the Secretary of State and his team for availing themselves, considering the time constraints. Briefly, just to review where we're at here, the Speaker has obviously tasked us to consider some of the things that have happened in this past election cycle and see if there are any ways that collectively we, as a shared partners can come up with some solutions that may be helpful to our citizens and how they go about voting. Once again, we, doing our best, I think, to shed the politics, which is hard to do when it comes to elections, but to do this in a bipartisan fashion and work together to find some of these solutions rather than point fingers. Mr. Secretary, I notice you've already taken position at the podium. Again, we thank you for being here. You're feel free to take the floor, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Good. Well, thank you, Chairman Blackman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak to you and find ways to avoid some of the issues we saw on June 9th and reflected in the testimony that you heard on Thursday. First, let me say that the lines we saw in Fulton County throughout the day and a few other counties in the morning were unacceptable. While we are still getting election day data back from the counties, we are getting a pretty good handle on the issues that need to be addressed before November. The issues we saw on Tuesday were related to process, not politics. It's time to take politics out of election administration and to focus on fixing the process issues so that every county can have a successful election in November. While recognizing that there were unacceptable issues in a few counties that have to be resolved by November, I would like to offer some perspective on the last election. June 9th was a record-setting election on many fronts. When COVID hit, we had to turn on a dime in the middle of the presidential preference primary, suspend the voting, and figure out a way to safely vote for all Georgians and keep all in-person voting in place. We took advantage of the no excuse absentee law that was passed in 2005 and signed by then Governor Sonny Perdue. 1,125,000 people voted from the place with the shortest line, their own kitchen table. This was a successful program overall, despite some issues in one county in particular, and smashed the record absentee turnout from the 2018 general election by over 400%. We had 3 weeks and one mandated Saturday of in-person advance voting, which also set a record for any primary at 326,000 votes. And then we had the June 9th election day turnout of 811,000 voters. All of that combined to be over 2.2 million voters cast in the primary, which is a record primary turnout ever, all in the middle of a pandemic. Now, the reason we are here today is to drill down to the issues we all saw on election day itself. The testimony you heard on Thursday reflects the data and information that we are still in the process of gathering. One thing we have seen is the majority of the issues we see were right here in my home county of Fulton. Almost 70% of all the issues reported statewide were from Fulton County. Other counties did experience the types of issues that we would expect to see with the first time using a new voting system, but most counties dealt with them professionally and quickly. Most importantly, other counties did a significantly better job implementing backup procedures to ensure that voting never stops when the polls are open. We have reports from multiple polling places in Fulton County where only about 10 people voted in the first 3 hours of voting. That is completely unacceptable. The fact of the matter is that, considering the circumstances, almost every county in the state adapted well. A few did not. As I said before, the issues we saw on Tuesday were related to process, not politics. It's time to take politics out of election administration and to focus on fixing the process issues so that every county can have a successful election in November. One thing I would like to note, Of the approximately 45 to 50,000 pieces of equipment deployed in the 159 counties, only 14 had to be replaced for actual mechanical issues. That is a replacement rate of 0.03% for a first-time deployment. We saw 4 basic issues, with one that exasperated the other 3. COVID, poll worker training, too many voters in a single polling location, and logistics. Every county faced these issues, and almost all successfully and skillfully managed through them. The testimony you heard last week all reflected anecdotally what our data is showing. Fulton was an outlier. My office has been in contact with Fulton's elections team with them so that they can ensure that these same issues do not occur in November. But one thing all of us in the counties need to be mindful of going into November, we are anticipating record turnout with 5 million overall voters, and if history is any guide, approximately half of those will vote on Election Day. That's 2.5 million people, 3 times what we saw on June 9th. Last week, I announced my November action plan to help Georgia counties ensure that they give their voters an improved election experience, regardless of their county and zip code. I appreciate the consideration this committee has given to SB 463. It will address long lines and lead to more polling locations over time. It will sync up the state and federal registration dates for this August runoff. It does good and necessary things to help us administer elections. I continue to support the full bill that passed the Senate, and I think that the General Assembly should give careful consideration to the idea to allow the state election board to step in to deal with consistently failing counties. I appreciate your consideration of that bill. I have been consistently saying that long lines to vote are not acceptable. SB 463 would force counties to take action if there are long lines. I believe it is in Georgia's interest to pass SB 463. With that, I am happy to take a few questions. My General Counsel, Ryan Germany, has instructed me not to get into issues that are currently in litigation, so I would defer any of those. Chris Harvey, you can put your arm up. Chris, our Elections Director, Gabriel Sterling, our implementation of our statewide voting system also here. And also in the room, our engineering staff from Dominion Voting System, and also NoWink, our vendor partners. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. And I appreciate your willingness to take questions. We have a few members lit up to ask. Who is number 8? 8? Are you 8? It's all moved around. Try your mic now, Representative Oliver.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. You led the election board to set a date to allow the opening of absentee ballots 8 days before June 9th. Have you taken a position about whether or not extending that 8 days to another longer date, 15 days or 10 days or more? Have you considered that as an option? Because counting the absentee ballots was a huge logistical issue in many counties, including DeKalb.
Thank you, Representative. That special election procedure that we put in place with the State Election Board was just for that particular time, but we would consider that for further election. But it was, the 8 days was to actually begin the process of opening up the absentee ballots,
Right.
But it was not tabulation. Tabulation was not to start until 7 p.m. like every other election,
Well,
just for
that's
that, for that clarification.
But
But-
statutorily, you cannot tabulate.
Right.
But are you
But
going?
as it relates to the 8 days, what we really want to do is get information for all the counties, and we'll be in the process of getting that. Because some counties took advantage of the 8 days, and we want to make sure, we want to see the counties that struggled, did they take advantage of the full 8 days? Did they not? And we'll get that information in the coming days, and we'll be sharing that back with the committee.
So you don't
because
have a position on that today?
We don't have a position on that today.
You have made a decision, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that you do not intend to send out applications for absentee ballots for the August runoff. Have you made a decision about whether or not you will send out applications for the November election?
At the present time, with the situation with COVID that has somewhat dissipated, and also looking at the dollars that we'd actually have to do that, it was very expensive to do that. We believe it was the necessary thing to do because of what we were facing for that primary due to COVID, but it was not our intention to do it for either the runoff, that'll be coming up in August or in the November election.
Have you made a final decision on the November election, considering COVID is still a question or not?
That would be my final decision as of today, based on what we see on the ground today.
Do you know, Mr. Secretary, how many exact match signature issues were flagged on June 10th?
I don't have that number before me today, but I can get that for you. Perhaps one of my gentlemen here can get that, but we'll get that back to you.
I'd like to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. Representative Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said a moment ago that counties were not to be tabulating. That when you say tabulating, this would be for clarification. That means actually scanning the ballots.
No, scanning the ballot. When you do your 15 days of early voting, plus that Saturday, the 16 days of early voting, those ballots are all being scanned continuously. Okay. And so, with the process of the absentees, the state election board allowed counties to begin the scanning process, but no tabulation.
Okay.
Just like it would be for all the early votes.
On the 15th of this month, shortly after the election, my local elections office called me in, and they made me aware of 13 separate issues that they experienced. They're not named DeKalb, and they're not named Fulton. One of them, the issues that they pointed out was printing of multiple ballots. That it was possible to print multiple ballots by simulating a paper jam, which was as simple as putting their hand in front of the printer output. And they pointed out that they could do this up to 3 times, and they reproduced the problem in front of me. Did anybody at any time make you aware that that was a problem?
I have the engineer from Dominion that would be the best person to ask that.
Well, I'm not asking about the nature of the problem. I'm asking if anybody made you aware of it.
Well, we've heard of that issue, and Dominion has not been able to replicate that, and so we're continuing to research that, and we can provide further information for you right now or at a later time if you'd like to hear from Dominion.
To me, it was the most alarming of the 13 issues that they brought up. So if there is an explanation, if it's more appropriate to wait for a minute while you get the rest of your questions in, I'd be willing to wait.
Well, Dominion, if you want to, I'll do mine first. Then we'll hold that. Sorry, Representative Turner, we'll circle back on that one.
I have lots of other questions, but I'm sure other members do as well. So I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Representative Turner. Let's see, Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. I have some follow-up questions related to the absentee ballot application and the mailing of the ballot itself. Representative Oliver had asked if you had made a decision about sending out absentee ballot applications for the November election. And I'd like to ask if the Secretary of State is willing to send out ballots to all of those who participated in the June 9th election, or at least send the absentee ballot applications to those who participated in the June 9th primary, given it is very likely that they will be voting again. And if they have voted by mail before, it is likely they will vote by mail again. And all the trends coming out of the Georgia Department of Health show that we are still in a pandemic, and we are expected to be in one for quite some time, including a spike in the fall.
We'll be mailing out absentee ballots to everyone that's on the rollover list, about 500,000 people, and everyone else would then do the application process as they normally have over the past elections.
And to follow up with that, I did read that you will be creating a portal to track the absentee, or a portal by which people can request their absentee ballot. Will that portal include any kind of real-time notification so that the voter can understand the step-by-step process of when the ballot is actually received and tracked? I know that SOS currently does that, but it seemed like there was a lot of lag time and inaccuracies in the June 9th election.
We're in the process of currently building out that portal, and the best person to answer that question would Gabriel Sterling, because he's been tasked with that project.
Great. And I have one more question. Do you plan on still using the same third-party vendor in Arizona to mail out ballots for the November election? I know that created quite a lag time of when voters requested their ballots, absentee ballots, and there were voters who waited up to 30 days in order to receive it.
The vendor was actually selected by Dominion. It was their subcontractor, but we have no instances where there was a lag time due to runback. It was actually due to the county election official, primarily in Fulton County. They did not process the absentee ballot applications that came in on an email form till after all the paper ones had been done. And that's why voters had seen such a huge delay in that. But we can, I also have Gabe Sterling answer that question
Great.
for additional information if you'd like.
Yes, and on that same vein, I know that one of the issues that the vendor had was sending that enclosure that was not actually an envelope with the instructions. I certainly don't think that was a county problem, and that caused a lot of confusion as well. So can you provide us a better understanding of if we are in fact using that same vendor in November, how we can tighten up some of the process?
That, I believe, goes to your question about the sleeve and the envelope
Yes.
and miscommunication between
Yes.
us. And so that'll be rectified, in November.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Representative Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some other questions I was going to ask, but based on your testimony, I think we need to kind of back up and set the record straight before I ask you this question. You mentioned that this was pretty much just an issue for Fulton County. I don't know if you watched the proceedings last week and the testimony last week, but several folks testified who were not from Fulton County that there were issues. In addition to, this is now the second time that we've had an election with these machines, including the pilot that happened last year, as well as the primary election, which just occurred. And we're still seeing the same sorts of problems that extend well beyond Fulton County. So I think it's not going to work, and it's not going to be good enough for you to just keep saying it's only Fulton County and not my issue. What specific policies, as a Secretary of State, are you going to put in place, having watched 2 elections now, to make sure that voting works better?
Well, what I did say, quote, one thing is we have seen is the majority of the issues we see were right here in my home county of Fulton, almost 70%. And last I checked, that's not 100%, it's 70%. And for a November plan of action is increased technical support. We have right now about 2,300 precincts. I believe we may have additional precincts this coming fall. And depending on what the number of precincts, but it's to have one tech in every precinct. And so that is really the resources that both our vendor, Dominion, will bring to bear, and also county resources, and leveraging those efforts. Most of the issues that we did face were relatively low level, simple. It just really, a tech could have solved those, and they did. But when they have to drive 10 minutes, 15 minutes, for example, Fulton County is a 70-mile long county, and you have other counties that are 40, 50 miles, also big counties. It can just take a while to get there. So having additional increased technical support right there in the precinct, we think will handle that. Enhanced hands-on training. Obviously with COVID, that was somewhat a difficult issue for the counties to do. It was also difficult if a county wanted additional training for their election official and their number 2 person for us to get out there during that time. But enhanced hands-on training. Also, we do need more polling places. And the reason we do, people need to understand, when Georgia, just like most of America, and I predict by 2024, everyone in America will have a verifiable paper ballot. It'll either be with a hand-marked paper ballot or a ballot marking device, but at the end of the day, that process takes longer than the old DREs that we had because you're now printing out a piece of paper. It just takes longer, and so you don't get the same throughput. So you need larger polling locations or you need more polling locations. So it's really finding that. But then also, another very important thing is that we need to make sure we expand the use of our pre-election day voting options. So that is absentee, but it's also the 15 days plus one of the Saturday of early voting. We had great turnout of 326,000, but we had 811,000 people turn up on election day. Usually it's about 50-50. And so it really got out of kilter there. So we need to make sure that we really encourage people to vote on that 3 weeks of early voting we have. We also need additional poll workers, because many of the poll workers that stepped out won't be coming back because the average age of poll workers was 72. And so even though if COVID dissipates a little bit, many of those poll workers that have stepped out may not be coming back. And so therefore, I've already reached out to great service organizations, and one great service organization reached out to us, and that really helped us. So I'm going to throw this idea out to you to consider it. I reached out to Rotary. When you think about your leaders in your community, think about great service organizations, and Rotary has solved so many things. I know they don't do politics, but would they consider, as a group of friends within Rotary, of just adopting one precinct in their county, something like that? Also, what about Boy Scouts for their Eagle Scout and that troop adopt one precinct? Think about that. Also, Alpha Kappa Alpha, I believe, reached out to us, and so your sororities and fraternal organizations like that, adopt one precinct. Think about what that will do. But what it really is, it's community-based, poll workers. Because when you hire people for just one day through a labor-ready service, that is more of a job for them. You really need to have people that have a passion for elections like you do, and like I do, like what all of us do, and so many other people have. We understand it's a precious right to be able to vote. And so we really want to have people that are grafted into the community, that really see it as a community, a social interaction event. But we do need more poll workers because of that. So that's a 4-point plan. And over the coming months, we'll be fleshing that out and working with the counties and making sure that they have the resources that they need. Thank you for your question.
If I could just have a follow-up question, is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes,
And this is
there'll be the last question, but
Okay.
please go ahead.
Yeah, what I'm trying to flag for you is there are still several problems that showed up in the piloting of these machines and using this new election system that showed up again in the primary, that have nothing to do with increasing the amount of poll workers. It has nothing to do with community organizations. For example, the issue of not having power cords. That is something that has nothing to do with how many poll workers are hired, how many community organizations you get in place. So I'm asking, through your power, what do you plan to do that the Secretary of State can control to make sure that we don't continue to go through elections without simple things like power cords?
The counties run elections, and there's a checklist that many of those counties have. And not having power cords I would think that'd be at the top of the list that counties would have on their checklist.
Mr. Secretary, we want to be, respectful once again of your
Okay,
time.
thank
I want
you.
to thank you. Is there any, if I may just, real quick, if you wouldn't mind sharing briefly, if you can, because I know you've got to go, but what is your vision for the partnership that your office has with the counties across the state? How do you, what is your, broad vision for how that partnership would work or operate?
You have to look at in the global perspective. We have some great county election officials, and when I think about Nancy Bort and Muskogee County, I think about Lynn Bailey, over in Richmond County. We have great election officials throughout. It's great that the folks that we do have, and each of them, some have best practices. In fact, Sam Teasley volunteered to be a poll worker, and being a poll manager, and his wife and his daughter. So that's going back to community-based being a poll worker. But in there, they had a laminated sheet, kind of like a laminated checklist, and that's something that Janine Evler had, come up with all on her own. But we want to share best practices, make sure that's all dissipated, that those best practices are shared throughout the counties. They work together as a team, and really we have to come alongside them, because that's where we understand that they run the elections, and whatever resources we can bring. We think the most important thing, obviously, is training, and retraining, and the techs, and having more techs in there, so if any issues do pop up, that it can be really handled expeditiously, so that we have an improved result in November. Is be very important. Well, as we get additional data, which we are gathering right now, we'll be returning that and sending that back to your committee and getting that information out to the members of the General Assembly, so you can look at that. I'm sure that may prompt more questions, but we're all working in this together to make sure we have improved results in November. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I'm assuming that if,
I-
we do have a few, questions that we're not able to get to right here, and if your colleagues are not able to answer those,
I think Mr. Sterling could probably answer most of those, or Chris Harvey, our state elections director, or these two gentlemen. Because if you're really going to drive into the weeds, that's where they spend 8 hours of their day.
yes, sir.
On election day, it's probably about 20.
Well, perhaps, if we do have some questions or we have some more discussion, we would love to have you back and, give us that opportunity. But
Please
for
do.
now, I know your time is short and we started late, so thank you again for accommodating us today.
Likewise, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Thank
sir,
you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you.
Could I just ask for the record that we would like to have more time with Secretary Raffensperger? And I think that's something that would be appropriate for the Governmental Affairs Committee in an investigation. And I would point out that voters often waited in line for hours, and the Secretary was here for 20 minutes.
Yes, sir, that, we can certainly add that to the record, Mr. Leader. Now, next we have, and I'm going to make sure I get your title right. You're the Chief Operating Officer of the Secretary of State, Gabriel Sterling, is that
Actually, it's
correct?
officially the Statewide Voting System Implementation Manager.
Okay, all right,
It's a
well,
mouthful.
even better. So, thank you. I appreciate you being here, and I'll turn it over to you to make some comments, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you, sir.
I think I'm just
We'll
here
get-
to answer the questions. I think
Do-
we had some held-up questions from Representative Oliver and Representative Nguyen, so whichever order y'all prefer to go, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, you want to go straight to the questions?
Yes,
Are
sir.
you comfortable with that? Okay, I think Representative Bernal was first.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, I'm a retired educator, and one of the things I kept hearing was that you all kept doing training and listening to some of the individuals that worked for you. They had training one day. And as an educator, I know that you cannot just train somebody one day on something as complicated as this system was. And so just like Mr. Secretary said, I would suggest that you maybe get some educators to come in and train your people because the training starts from the state and then it goes down to the local level. But I know you cannot train a person in one day, and people learn differently. Some learn by hands-on, and some of the criticism came that they didn't even get trained on that particular equipment. So my suggestion is that you take the time that's necessary to make sure that everybody understands what their job is, how the machines operate, so that on that day, they're not all scattering around like mice trying to figure out what's going on. Thank you.
That's a pretty good description of what happened on Election Day. Just to clarify, you're right. The state is in the business of training the trainers at the county level. We did multiple regional trainings and multiple trainings on top of doing refresher trainings up until the COVID situation really began to hit. And we are looking, what we're going to do is we're going to take the poll pad data and work backwards from that and see the specific precinct locations and polling locations where there were the most issues, because we see when the opening times were and the closing times were and the average amount of time that each person was processed. And we're going to work with the counties to give them that specific information so they can put resources with us alongside them and Dominion, our vendor, who's working on an updated training program to fix those main issues. But what we discovered is there's two sides when it comes to training on these situations. Here's all this new equipment side. But what is equally important and what failed in some counties, especially in the early morning time, was what happens when the equipment is not, if you can't get it going. And that's the election processes, because one of the things we always emphasize in our county calls, which we have once a week, is nothing ever stops voting. We found out that there were counties that did not deliver emergency ballots, that the rule calls for 10% being there. They didn't understand that they could scan those ballots, so some of them were handling them as provisional ballots, which takes longer. One of the other process issues that we had was in mailing out the applications, people requested ballots, mainly in one county. A lot of them didn't get them in time. And about 40,000 people on election day were having to cancel their ballots and then vote in person. And sometimes they brought their ballots because they just wanted to vote in person, because that's what you do in Georgia. We like voting in person. And historically, we only do 5% absentee. But we're focusing on two things for the training side. One, We're developing those county, what we call field techs, which they will be specifically trained on just the election day equipment itself, those 4 specific devices. We've already figured out a few things that we can do to make things easier for those poll workers when they get in there. One of the main issues we saw as a reported issue was people putting the encoders on the poll pads upside down. And the first thing it says on the checklist we sent out is, if it's not functioning, flip it over. So what we're doing is we're going to put a sticker on that says, this side up. On the UPSs, it will press a button and it will light for a second as if it's going to start, but a security and safety device on that is you have to hold that thing for 3 seconds. So we're going to make a sticker that says, please hold on switch for 3 seconds. And these are the kind of things that we saw that were really causing the problems on the equipment side. But then there weren't people who understood, because as the secretary pointed out, the average age of a poll worker is 72, and they knew election process regardless of equipment. So we're trying to focus on both those areas, and by getting the data from the poll pads, which we have the majority of it uploaded now. I think we're missing 3 precincts now, David, out of the 2,300 polling locations. We'll be able to do that for each and every county, starting with the major metros, because they have a lot more work ahead of them just because of the sheer volume of people. But we are absolutely going to be focusing more on making sure they have some very focused hands-on training. And we're even going to be working on a tool that will allow people to video their own training so they can go back and look at it. But one of the things we saw was that there was a variability in the county levels. And one of the things the secretary often says is, we have a lot of responsibility for elections with very little authority over elections. We can't make counties do things. We can, here's your best suggestion, here's your best practice, look at the code. And we tell them to go to their county attorneys for information. So one of the things we're going to ask them to do is we're going to record those sessions, or have them record those sessions for each of the poll workers, so they can have their own things, so they can remember and be reminded of what they learned and saw, because as you pointed out, people learn differently. Some learn by reading, and others learn by video. Now, one of the other things we're going to do,
Mr.
Secretary,
Sterling,
yes.
I hate to interrupt you. My board is lighting up
Okay.
pretty big, and I know your time is
I'll follow back
probably
up with you
short.
later.
All
an
right,
email.
thank you.
Representative Vernal, if he's answered the question to your liking, we
He
may
has.
move on and
Thank
try
you.
to circle back so that, Mr. Harvey, Director Harvey, would you go ahead and introduce yourself since we moved straight into questioning? Some of these may be more appropriate, I think, possibly for you. And I think other members of your team, Gabe, that y'all have present that may be willing to answer questions,
Well, we give-
assuming most of them would.
Okay.
Is that correct?
They would all, everybody's going to have something to say probably. So if you want to have them stand up and introduce themselves now.
If you would just stand up and introduce yourself, Director.
My name is Chris Harvey. I'm the election director for the Secretary of State's office. I'm happy to be here. Happy to answer any
Can't
questions
get it.
you guys have.
Thank you very much, sir.
Eric?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Dr. Eric Coomer. I'm the director of product strategy and security for the Community Voting Services.
And he went to Berkeley, so he's smart.
Good afternoon. My name is David Greenwald. I'm with Nolan County Southeast Election Director, responsible for overall full-head operations in Georgia.
All right, thank you very much. My apologies for the interruption, but shortened time today due to the fact that we ran a little bit late with some very important issues on the House floor. So I'm going to ask Representative Gullett, I think he was next on the list. He had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mrs. Sterling, and Mr. Harvey, too. 2 quick questions, I hope. So when we heard testimony last week, numerous issues came forward. I served on the elections board prior to being in the legislature, and I do understand that primarily the counties are responsible for the elections. And so the ones that have failed their voters on election day, whether they didn't have the proper poll workers trained there because they didn't train them, whether they didn't have a power cords, they didn't have emergency ballots, whatever it is, what are the repercussions for those counties? That might be a Harvey question, I'm not sure, but
Actually, it might be a Ryan Germany question more, or Chris, either way. Chris, do you want to come over to the microphone?
and I have one follow-up after that.
The repercussions would generally be in systems where there are significant failures that impact the voting. The investigative division would do an investigation, present the findings to the state election board, and then the state election board could enact sanctions against responsible entities or individuals. Often it would be in the form of a consent order that would require some type of solution rather than necessarily a punitive, although they could do that too. But generally it's resolved with the county or the person providing an explanation and then showing how it's not going to happen again. They've taken concrete steps to keep it from repeating.
Yeah, I thought you would say that. Is that going to happen during this, is that going to happen because of this election?
It is. There are multiple investigations that have been opened. I'm not going to say that for every single individual failure, there's going to be an investigation on every single thing. But certainly where there was a significant impact to voting and there were repeated or multiple issues, in several cases, more than several, I think, but I know at least several have already been opened.
Thank you.
Kept you waiting, Representative Mary Frances Williams. You had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The light doesn't work, so,
Yes, ma'am.
okay. Actually, I have two questions. One is about tech support, and then two are about equipment. So the first one, I think, for Dominion. So what are the contractual requirements under the state contract with Dominion for tech assistance? It looked like the initial agreement required hundreds, and in my county of Cobb, there was only one technician available during Election Day, which is a pretty big county.
I'll let Mr. Sterling.
The final thing we came down to is they would have county level techs in every county, plus regional techs, plus the big four, Cobb, Fulton, Gwinnett, and DeKalb, had multiple ones. So I had to follow up to hear, I believe there was more than one deployed in Cobb on that day. But we have also asked them to step up the ability for us to have the field level techs for the November elections. And in the 92 counties having them on August 11th, there will be a stepped up amount of field techs as well. And help me with your second question. I apologize answering your first.
No, that's okay. I didn't ask the other two yet. So I was wondering if there were any plans to provide additional precinct ballot scanners, because I know that was an issue, and also if you were considering additional poll pads, since this was also a cause of delay.
We worked with every county, and up until literally, I guess, Chris, when did we finally cut it off? April-ish? When they finally, on the additional? Yeah. We worked with every county and said, how many do you need? What do you want? And if a county asked, we gave it to them. We gave them every scanner they asked for, every poll pad they asked for. One of the things we have considered potentially is having what we call a poll manager poll pad to be a troubleshooting poll pad, so that you wouldn't take the however many you have deployed at the time to do that. Now, one of the situations you're going to have, and this was alluded to by the secretary, no matter what paper ballot system you use, let's say, as a hypothetical, everybody comes evenly throughout the day, okay? Yeah, it never really happens. And you can get people going a pretty good flow of a vote every 25 seconds. That means the most people you can get through a polling location with one scanner is 1,725. And this is just a different environment. In the old environment, DREs, you just throw more DREs at it and you can make it work. So we've tried to kind of point this out with the counties. I'm going to add some of this, will answer some questions. One of the things we're doing in the 4-point plan is we're going to take every precinct, number of polling locations, and the equipment that they're going to put there, and do like a green. This is going to work for your county. This is going to be fine. Yellow, you can throw more equipment or poll workers at this, and this can work. Or red, ain't no way, no how you're going to get this many people through this precinct. To give them some roadmap on this, because sometimes they're so busy trying to do things that they don't take a step back to do some of that big planning. So we're going to try to take that off of them and give them that kind of direction. So we have the ability to do that, and we have some spares to put around, but we upped the amount that we bought, knowing this was going to be a thing. So the number of BMDs, the law calls for one for every 250. We have one for every 225. We added another 500 poll pads statewide. We added another, I think, 300 scanners statewide to have that additional throughput availability. So
Okay.
we're doing that.
And I just would like to say for the record, we did have problems with Cobb, but I would like to say that our Cobb Elections Director, Janine Eveler, was great in working with us from, all day long, answering questions, trying to put out fires, and was very transparent about what the problems were and how she was trying to deal with them. So I felt like she did the best she could given what the situation was. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Gravely?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an honest question. It got me thinking when it was mentioned about power cords earlier. Were there precincts where machines showed up and there was no way to plug the machine into the wall and turn it on?
When the representative said that, that's the first I'd heard that, other than things not being actually delivered at all on time.
So we're not talking about extension cords or anything like that reach outlets or anything.
Like,
correct?
your HP printer has a power cord, it needs that power cord to run.
And so there were machines that did not have power cords. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted a point of clarification on that.
And the secretary said number 4 thing we saw was logistics. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. That
Okay.
plus late delivery and items like that.
Thank you.
Representative Turner?
Thank you. Can we go back, since we have our folks from
Eric, you
Dominion?
want to come up here?
And for you, Mr. Sterling, first, were you made aware of the issue that Cherokee County brought up with the multiple printing of ballots?
Yes.
And what was done about it?
We got with our engineers and said, can you replicate this? And that was frankly, we were in the middle of trying to do COVID, because it was February when we first heard about that, I believe, from Cherokee County. And it was right not long after that we were starting to deal with getting into the presidential primary. So I handed it off to the engineers, and I had to go back to my emails to see what I might have heard back at the time. I just don't have a recollection.
Okay. So the secretary mentioned a moment ago that you haven't been able to replicate it. Were there any efforts to get with the local elections officials to see if you could see what they were seeing?
Just to be clear, I only became aware of this issue recently in the last couple of days. I know that our engineers in our office are looking into it. I'm not sure if we've gotten all of the data necessary from the county that experienced this, but we are certainly committed to doing a root cause analysis and providing any mitigation or fixes that are required if this does turn out to be a case.
You'll forgive me, something's not adding up, Mr. Sterling. If he's only finding out about this a couple of days ago, what was done to try to fix it?
I handed it over to Tom Feehan with Dominion at the time and said, this is something we've heard about, and that was where I left it back in February.
Let me clarify a couple of things. So we do have an actual hardening procedure that's around the printer functionality. So there are a variety of things that you can do on the printer to try to create additional duplicates of a print job. We do have policies and procedures that go in to try to lock all of that functionality down. So there may have been some misunderstanding of what the actual cause of this potential duplication is, and it may have been, this matches what we have in this procedure manual on how to prevent that, and there may have been some miscommunication along that line. But like I said, based on the information that we have recently, we are doing a full analysis to try to figure out if there's some other way that the printer can accidentally produce a duplicate copy.
Having seen it and having them reproduce it, the gentleman who made the Secretary of State's office aware of this, he said it was during a process called LNA, which I assume you guys know about. He was going through to try to see how everything functioned and make sure everything was working the way it was expected to. During the LNA process is when he discovered that issue, and they told me that they made you guys aware and that there was a potential for it to happen. However, they weren't. There was like a sense that it wasn't really a big deal. Would you share that sentiment, or?
Representative Turner, I spoke with the election director in Cherokee County about that. And at the time, I did immediately let the folks at Dominion, Scott Tucker, who's one of the project managers here, know about it. In talking with, and I believe it was Kim Stansel who I spoke with, it may have been somebody else in Cherokee County, she was describing the process. And as we went through it, I said that if that is an issue, and Dominion was looking into it, I said there are a lot of safeguards in order to keep that from happening or to keep that from being a problem, if that is something that's happening, including poll workers that are observing the process, poll workers that are manning the scanner to make sure that multiple ballots aren't being able to be scanned, that one person, one ballot scanning, and that if the tech came over or the poll worker came over to fix the jam, they would presumably watch and observe to make sure the voter could print their ballot and move on. So we didn't do nothing about it. I recommended that we had Dominion looking at it, but in the immediate term, she could use her poll workers as observers to make sure that people weren't doing anything unusual with the equipment.
Okay, so sort of related, there was a decision made at some point to not report results until the end of the night. Why is that?
Okay.
It wasn't until the end of the night. The secretary had made a decision the previous week, and on the Monday before said, we will not be releasing any results until every polling location is closed. And at the last polling location in Georgia was closed at 10:10, so he stuck with that because in his opinion, even though county results were getting put out, he was afraid that people were in line and results were getting released, that it could influence their vote or their ability to want to stay in line to vote. That's why he did that. The same reason that he doesn't think you should be reporting exit polling on the East Coast when there's still voting going on the West Coast. And he made that very clear the Monday before the election.
So one of the things that came to my attention, and isn't it true, that there are concerns with certain counties engaging in potentially fraudulent type of activities?
I would think that all counties would follow their oath and not engage in fraudulent activities.
So there's zero concern about people looking at the results statewide if their polls are still open and printing a number of ballots to try to stuff the ballot box?
I think it would be next to impossible to pull off something like that, quite honestly. But again, I haven't really given that specific thing that much thought, because that's kind of an outlying kind of idea. Because essentially, we thought most polls will hopefully be closed by 7:30, not 10:10.
Okay. And one of the things that we heard over and over again from different counties, Bartow County said everything was working great except that they were flooded by the absentee ballot requests. Cherokee County had the same complaint. Walton County had the same complaint. Floyd County had the same complaint. Is it your intention to replicate the mail out of ballot requests unsolicited in the future, or is this something that the elections office are going to have to gear up to deal with moving forward?
I would refer you to the Secretary's previous answer, but one of the things we did see was the fact that if we did this and replicated it for the November election, I think it would have be physically impossible for most counties to keep up with that level of processing, which is the reason that we made the decision and are moving forward building a portal that can take that load off the county, and we're going to make it mirror the online voter registration portal, which would then allow the counties to just look at a dashboard and say, yes, this person is going to get an absentee ballot, no, this person won't. Similarly, when they said this person is an individual in our county who should be registered. And it will go directly to ENET, so they will not have that crush of manual tracking and manual doing, even though we took special steps on those applications to put scanning ability on there so they could bring up the individual voters. It was a love us, hate us kind of thing. They loved us when we did it. They hated it when everybody hit them all at one time with those things. 'Cause it was a large logistical thing to do, but given the COVID situation, we didn't see any other path forward to allow for safe voting in Georgia at that time.
And the last problem that kind of created for them was the canceling of ballots, which when people showed up the day of with their absentee ballot in hand, or they even left it at home, and then there had to be some sort of verification process to cancel their ballot. How are we going to be dealing with that moving forward?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I don't think we'll have nearly the level of cancellations because now people are more familiar with the process. But if we do, there's two ways we're looking at handling that. One is there's a possibility we can change the screen on the poll pad to catch about 99 or 95% of those and have this person's, their ballot has been received, so we don't have to do the verification back to the county. Or we can have, similarly to when we have early voting going, having a access into the ENET system to see that individually at the precinct level, instead of having to verify the county, which would take some time. Like in Cobb County, if you have 2 or 3 lines lined up and you have 4 precincts calling at one time, you can wait for 15 minutes. So we are very well aware of that and trying to do things to logistically take that load off of the poll workers and off the county workers as well.
Leader Trammell, I know you I think you tried to get our attention earlier, and it was unintentionally missed you, so I'm going to recognize Leader Trammell right now if I can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly understand we're all under the stress of COVID conditions, just like this election was and will be in November. So I'll try to condense the questions I have down to just a couple if I can, and the one I would ask the Secretary. The first question I have is, it sounds like there were contracts that had performance obligations for vendors with respect to the election, including the original purchase of equipment, supplemental contracts perhaps. The first question I would have is, when will those contracts be available for public review?
I believe they're available already, so they're in public.
So anybody can just go, how do you, just an open records request?
Yeah.
And those could be? Okay. The second question with respect to that is,
And
what
first
were
one's
the...
on the DOAS side. It's already on the DOAS side and has been since July of last year.
Great, thank you for that. Second question is, what were the respective performance obligations of the vendors with respect to the conduct of the primary election?
Believe the language, Ryan, you want to answer that better? We would have to go back and look at the exact language on that. Basically, you want a successful certified election at the end of the day.
Okay, but what they actually required to do? Like, my understanding,
they're
I'll just
training-
give you an
Okay,
example.
go ahead.
You know, when we sent when the forms were sent out, the absentee ballot application request, I mean, that was a third party, that was outsourced, correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, that was one of the things they had to do, right?
Yes.
So that's why I'm asking, it's just those basic level details. You know, for the regular conduct of the election, most things go through the Board of Elections. They send out the absentee ballot. And that's all I'm trying to figure out is
Okay, you're separating
what
out
your
two
vendors were
there's
trying
two
to do.
different things. We can talk about the absentee ballot program, which is one thing that's a separate standalone, and that's the regular early voting and election day stuff. There's two different items on that. Which one would you like to focus on first, and I can break them apart for you.
Well, why don't we start with the election day items on what the vendor's performance obligation, I guess the equipment, Dominion, what was its performance obligation with respect to the operation of election day?
Essentially, they're supposed to be able to make sure that the equipment is in working order, and then the counties need to have trained level people to make those function. COVID did complicate that, and we're all kind of aware of that. So the main thing was they delivered everything on time under the obligations of the contract. The last delivery of the initial order was on February 14th, which was pre-COVID. We did the supplemental deliveries up until, bear with me a second, it's been kind of a blur going back to this, but it was all done by, I want to say May, other than things like some transport bags and straps, but all the actual election equipment was all delivered, I think, by late April, early May. That was the biggest logistical thing for them to get out the way first. They were also obligated to do training of the trainers at the county level, and they did multiple ones in October and November, and there were refreshers on top of that in January that were both knowing focused and Dominion focused. And that was getting prepared for the March PPP. They rolled out the items into the March PPP. We had 2 weeks with 288,000 voters with no real issues at that point. So that brings us to, this is where they start to merge into two different things. We suspended that election 2 weeks in. In doing that, we decided to preserve the 288,000 votes that had already been cast. So by doing so, we then had to have multiple different ballot styles you would not normally have to do based on the ballot combinations in the state. So we went from about 15,000 ballot styles to 36,000 ballot styles that had to be built very quickly. They built all those out. They were sent to the state and then to the counties for verification. Those were the ones that would be used for the UACAVA treatment. So that was done, the UACAVA deadline, which is for military and overseas voters, had already hit, and we had started mailing those ballots out before we were able to postpone that election. So that's why we have the May 19th across those things, because once that was built, you could not change that under this system. So we started mailing those out, and we made the decision very quickly, and within 6 days went to another vendor, which was R.R. Donnelly. With the help of the Republican Democrat parties, we were able to redesign the absentee ballot application very quickly, and R.R. Donnelly was able to turn those around and start mailing them the last week of April, first week of May. And that was 6.9 million people that we mailed to. In doing that, we had to make a decision to do residential or mailing address because we couldn't quickly discern who had a mailing address and who had a physical address for the residents. So we mailed out 6.9 million of those, and then about 2 weeks later, we sent out, there was 278,000 people who had mailing addresses. It had actually been 325,000, but 40,000 of them had already gotten an application and sent it in. So they were able to get them at their residences, and we mailed those out subsequently. Then Dominion, we tasked with finding us a third-party vendor to do the fulfillment, because we knew that if we did the fulfillment manually at the county level, the crushing work that Representative Turner referred to on just handling the applications would have been impossible without having multiple people getting the wrong ballot, because there were 36,000 ballot styles. And in Fulton and DeKalb, there were thousands. There was being next to impossible to pull the right ballot for the right person. So all three of those vendors met those obligations. The techs in the field that were Dominion employees were there to support the counties. And as the Secretary pointed out, the vast majority of issues we saw were minor technical things. As an example, and I'm sure y'all heard some of this, people are saying the UPSs were not turning on properly. In the training, and it was very clear, you have to hold the button down for 3 seconds. If you don't hold the button down for 3 seconds, the UPS will not turn on. That's the battery backup and capacitor for the BMDs. Another issue that we ran into was the multiple layers of security we put on the poll pads made it difficult if somebody misplaced a pin or had a password in the wrong place or transposed a number. And that made it difficult to get some of those going. They're like, well, it's busted, we can't get in. And they were having a hard time calling into their local elections office. I know that we had that problem in DeKalb specifically, where they couldn't get the actual pin. But they executed along the lines of what we were expecting, except for in a couple of areas. And part of it was the COVID, and part of it was just the overwhelming number of small items that had to get fixed, that in most counties were fixed, as Representative Williams pointed out. In Cobb, they had some issues in the morning, but they were able to work through them. The volume of them were very high in Fulton County. And the splitting of responsibilities comes down to the counties on a lot of this stuff. And that's why we're trying to get the data to focus on where we need to have dominion and know, like, really focus their training with the trainers, and so the trainers know who to specifically go to at the precinct location and polling location to get that done properly. It's a long-winded answer, I know, but we're still getting data to examine what the actual outcomes were and what the actual issues were. I will say this, to point back to the Secretary's testimony earlier, that out of about 50,000 items, we don't know how many were deployed because we're doing the run now. They're going to give the information this week. 14 actual mechanical issues were found that had to be replaced by techs, which is a replacement rate of 0.03%. So the actual machinery, once you had a human being who knew to make it work, worked the way it was intended. But for a voter, when they're standing in line, if the machine's not working, whether it's because the person knows how to turn it on or it's busted, it's busted. And that's one of the things we're trying to avoid by deploying all those techs in every precinct.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sensitive to the committee's time, and I have a long list, but if I might just ask one final question to sort of sum it all up. While we could talk about the technical issues, and I appreciate your answer to that question, I'm very interested in what the performance obligations of the vendors were and are in the contracts. I think that's very important. But overall, what letter grade would you give to the Secretary of State's office for the conduct of the elections, like back in grade school? A being excellent, F being failure, and the same question with respect to the vendors. And is there anything you could do to improve that grade for November?
Well, obviously, we have our November action plan, which we're planning to improve it, because I love gotcha questions on a late after a COVID day. But listen, I think the counties could have done better. There's ways that we could have possibly done this, but COVID overlaid everything. And I think it's kind of an unfair question on some of those items. And one of the things we're looking at, if you compare us to other states right now, Nevada had 8-hour lines. South Carolina had 2-hour lines. Los Angeles had to replace 5 to 25% of their BMDs when they did theirs. I mean, this is, in a COVID situation, everybody's not going to be doing their best. And that includes the counties. That includes this office to a degree, I'm quite sure. When I look backwards on it, what else could we have done differently? We might have been able to do a little more hand-holding, but we did a lot of hand-holding. And one of the things that we learned when we went to Fulton County on Wednesday, and Mr. Harvey asked, "What else could we do for you, Mr. Barron?" He says, "I don't know. I don't know what else you could have done for us. You did everything we asked. We asked the counties, whatever we give them, we gave it to them." I mean, they literally did that. We all have concerns about training, but one of the things that we can't fix, again, goes back to the Secretary's comments. When you hire 250 people the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday before the election, you cannot possibly train them. And you know you don't have those people in place. And when those people are running polling locations and they don't have any experience, and you kind of push them in the deep end, we can't do any control on that. One of the things we ask for in a House Bill 463 is the ability to force counties to make better decisions when it comes to their polling locations and cut them down or deploy more equipment. We have no cudgel by which to do that right now. We have no ability. We can advise. We can give best practices to. We can't make them do things. We're going to do a few things, like we said, pointing out that where they need to do polling locations. We're going to take every quick reference guide. And I think part of the issue was we threw so much information on Firefly. That's the item we used to communicate directly with the elections directors, that they were overwhelmed by it and didn't realize everything we had there in some cases. But one of the things I saw in the paper is, well, there was no checklist. We literally have quick reference guides for everything we talked about. And we're going through to see who didn't call into the county calls and who did, because there's people who sometimes didn't. We had people who came to the training who left after lunch sometimes. I mean, we can do a lot, and we have the resources to do a lot, and we're trying to really direct those resources. We're going to be data-driven in those decision-making processes with the counties. But with knowing what we know now and seeing what we've seen, we know where the issues are. And we're going to do everything from our office to help the counties pull off a successful election, knowing we're going to have triple the turnout on Election Day.
All right, let me see if I can get in order here. Representative Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I said before, there are problems that have occurred in elections, not just starting with the primary, that have nothing to do with COVID. One of those consistent problems is folks requesting an absentee ballot and never receiving it. You mentioned before about the website. I think that's going to help my constituents a little bit because at least provides some tracking where you can see who actually requested. But for example, in 2018, I had constituents who requested absentee ballots like they always do, did not receive them, had to drive out of state to pick up their college kids, who those ballots were for, bring them back in town so that they could vote, all at the last minute because they never received the absentee ballots. So this website might help with tracking, but that's not going to ensure that everybody who requests an absentee ballot will actually receive one. So the first question is, what is your plan to make sure that everybody who wants an absentee ballot receives one? And then the second question is, are you still going to use the vendor out of Arizona to help with this process, or have you thought about getting a Georgia vendor?
There is no Georgia vendor that can do this. They do not exist. I can tell you that right now. The only thing we're going to be using Runbeck for specifically is going to be for the rollover list. So it's going to be about 300,000, 350,000 for the August election and 505,000 for the November election. They will be doing just that one time. Then we're going to be getting it back to the counties to do the normal processing that they would do. The website isn't really just for tracking, although it's going to help. And one of the issues we saw, and again, this was mainly in Fulton County, the emailed applications they got were not handled well. We met with them yesterday morning. They admitted it. They know they had an issue with it. They know they had tech issues, and they know they had problems. People sent in multiple. Again, this is a county level thing. We have no visibility on this. They would get 4 PDFs on a single email. They would only take the first one. That's a training issue at the county level. So we have no visibility on this, except now we will have the portal, which we're going to try to drive everybody to. The person puts in their own address themselves. They validate it themselves. They will get an email back to them saying, you have now gotten this, which in Fulton did not happen. There was this they mailed it April 2nd. They didn't see until May 28th, all of a sudden it's been processed. So there's things specifically along those fronts, but this portal does more than just the tracking. It will give people, I have this email from you telling me this happened. And I can tell you this, for the Runbeck ones that were sent, the average time was 2 to 4 days once it was received by Runbeck. And in the statewide, it was 96.7%. We know for sure were scanned in as being delivered. And inside that 3%, there were thousands of people who actually cast ballots. So we know those were received. They just didn't get the last scan from USPS on that one. And in Fulton County, of the 126,000 that were put in before May 28th, 99.96% were delivered to those people. Now, if they didn't get put in, the Secretary of State's office never sees it, and the vendor never sees it. And that's one of the issues we ran into with Fulton. And in fact, one of the things we had to do, we did an audit because we were pulling them off of the date of the issue date. So every day we'd go in and pull the issue date. We had about 3,000 statewide that had earlier issue dates or issue dates in 2022. We were able to find those and then give them back to the counties to mail out on May 29th. Of the 3,000, I think 2,200 of them were in Fulton.
Okay, but the thing that's angering, I think, a lot of folks on the committee is where Secretary Raffensperger is saying that it's mostly Fulton, you're saying it's Fulton. No part of my district is in Fulton County. I'm 100% in DeKalb County. And I'm telling you that from the 2018 election and all elections since, it has been an issue where folks have not received absentee ballots. So please stop saying that it's mostly Fulton or just Fulton, because I assist my constituents, and it was not just one family that had this issue where they requested absentee ballots and they did not receive them. And that's regardless of whether or not COVID is an issue. It's just an issue that people are not receiving absentee ballots that they requested.
I'm not going to argue this point with you because you're right, counties process those. We never see them. I mean, if the county does not put it into the ENET system, the Secretary of State's office has no way of knowing if a human being has requested a ballot or not. I do know that the director of DeKalb County has brought in 3 outside consultants to try to help them with their absentee ballot process, knowing the issues they had in 2018. So I know that they're working on that, and they're actually some of the really good people in the business in the United States trying to find ways to make sure that your processes in DeKalb County can be reflected in a way that gets those people those ballots in a timely manner, and they have the tracking of it they can see on the MVP site.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We have a number of questions left, Mr. Sterling, but I just wanted to jump in here, if I might. I'm very curious because the ballots and what Representative Shannon mentioned regarding how they were lumped in and how we had to count them. And I've spent some time with my county discussing this. Was it contemplated that when we looked at a third party and we were going to send these ballots out, what resources it would take at the county level, and considering that it's going to take considerable resources to count those ballots and those that are rejected and the issues that are had? I mean, you also had to manage the elections, early voting. You also had to manage new machines, COVID environment on election day. So, I mean, I guess my question would be is how was that contemplated ahead of time? And is that all that we have to learn post June 9th from that situation?
It was deeply contemplated ahead of time. Before even COVID hit, we had made the decision, because we had been able to negotiate a pretty good price for most of the equipment, to take everybody from the gravity-fed central scanning in the state to the G2140, which is the high-capacity central scanning device. So every county in the state starts with one of those. And then for the larger counties by population, that we upped those. When we decided to do the absentee ballot program, we then purchased 50 additional of those that we distributed to the counties at their request. Gwinnett County got up to 10 of those, I believe, at the end of the day, because they had to double the.
Less than the machinery. I'm just referring to more of the personnel. I mean, we're talking about people that already have responsibilities. They have early voting responsibilities. They have election day responsibilities. And then we also have now ballot counting responsibilities regarding these absentee ballots that are submitted. And obviously you can go out and hire more people, maybe if you're fortunate, but do you have time to train those people? Do they know what's going on? Did we know that we were going to have to assign these in precinct and separate them out? That's beyond just having to slide them through. We've heard a good bit of testimony from the slide them into the counter, but they had to be separated by precinct also, manually, locally. So I guess that type of
They actually, if people were doing that, they didn't have to. I'm not aware of a question of that. You do
not only the
separate by
ballots
precinct.
themselves, but the actual envelopes is the way it was presented to us last week.
And I do not believe that we have a rule stating that, and they can actually scan those in any order, and it will be separated by precinct as it is. So I believe the election processes they followed were not necessary to do, which would obviously, if that would be a lot more extra work, and I can understand some being frustrated about that, but that is not a necessary thing to do.
So you actually believe that you disagree with their
As I understand
their
it,
process?
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
believe you have to separate it by precinct, because the scanner will separate those out, because there's a precinct identifier and a code at the bottom of it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I interjected, and Representative Wynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you answered some of the follow-ups that I had already. But to clarify, under the current contract, we are scheduled to use that same third-party vendor for the initial batch of ballots.
For the rollover list, yes.
Right. So then after we have the rollover list, then it goes back to the counties? Is that what you said?
The counties will do the UACAVA, the vendor will
Mhm.
do the rollover list, and all
Yep.
new requests will be that way. And to answer your question from
Sure.
earlier, 10 pallets of our regular security envelopes were sent to Runbeck this week.
Okay. And is the SOS going to be ensuring that those counties have all the proper resources to be able to handle the amount of absentee ballots that we expect to come in?
Everything is on the election store they can request, and a lot of them had already requested stuff that they ended up not having to use except for that last week. So they have a good inventory now. We have a few million of everything available and ready to go if they request them and need them to be sent to them. But we're having a county call with them next week, and we'll go over some of those to say, check your inventories, make sure you have what you need, knowing that you'll probably have a higher volume now that people have learned the ability to do the absentee ballots, yes.
And then I do want to follow back up on a question I asked earlier, and I'd like a better understanding of how the SOS decided to not automatically send out absentee ballot applications to all the active voters like we did for the June 9th election.
Well, the biggest thing goes back to Representative Turner's question, which is just the sheer volume of work it would take, and to Chairman Blackman's point that it's a lot of extra work on those people right now to process the manual applications themselves. But this is why we're trying to build this portal, which will take the workload off them, take away errors, and be able to handle most of this, and we're gonna do a lot of advertising. We're gonna use our CARES money and HAVA money on those fronts to let people know that portal exists and try to drive them to it.
Are you concerned about the lack of internet access in some parts of Georgia that might make it more prohibitive for those folks to be able to use the portal?
Of course, we're concerned, but we're trying to get the most people we can with the resources we have available to us right now.
And then I have one last question about the technicians. The technicians that you mentioned that would be hired, are they being provided by Dominion or from Inc.? And does the Secretary of State carry the cost to provide counties with these technicians?
Right now, we're working on a plan that would be some Dominion hire. Some, actually, we're going to be working with other state agencies, seeing if they will lend out IT personnel on election day in the locations in the counties where they exist. And then also county level IT people to be trained in a similar way. It'll be a mix. And the carry will be a mix of SOS and a mix of Dominion, because I think we are in a partnership to make sure that we have a successful election in November. The exact details of that don't exist yet. We're anticipating getting a more fully fleshed out plan next week.
Thank you. And I do want to also reiterate, like many of the members on this committee, that this is not a Fulton-only issue. We heard from many different counties last week, and I live in DeKalb. My own voting precinct, the machines were down all morning. They were down for at least 2 hours, and that's DeKalb County. And so I do want, want you to understand that it is not Fulton only.
And let me reemphasize. We fully understand that there were issues around the entire state. But when we look at the sheer volume of them and the inability to then recover from them, DeKalb, Gwinnett, Cobb had the biggest amount of issues that were reported to us. And they, for the most part, managed to recover in most of the precincts because they used the backup procedures and they got the techs in time. Fulton simply didn't manage to recover. And one of the biggest issues we have, and this is something we're going to have to deal with in November more than likely, the Park Tavern precinct that we all saw, with 16,000 registered voters with a line of 300 people to start the day. They only allowed 8 people at a time in there for social distancing. I believe we can look at some other states, but it is going to be physically impossible to have a regular election day in a regular precinct with social distancing. We can social distance outside, but then try to get people through those issues very quickly. We're looking at getting some plexiglass dividers up to keep people more safe, but you cannot have you can't have 8 people in a voting space at a time. It is a question of throughput and volume. You have to be able to get people through those voting election day polling locations.
Representative Oliver?
I believe my understanding is what the Secretary of State said was correct, that prior to this year, early voting was appreciated or chosen by voters about 50% of the time. On June 9th, it was more like 2/3. Yeah, that is the national trend. Am I correct about that?
Yes, ma'am.
So not sending out the absentee ballot applications is a failure to ignore the national trend and further protect our voters from what we know, what you just said is that you cannot get X number of voters in a real precinct with social density. Park Tavern is a good example. So I'm really concerned. I think the portal and offering additional opportunities to verify absentee ballots is going to help. The voter experience is going to help. But there's between 500,000 and 1.2 million is 700,000 people that you should send them an application for a ballot, is my opinion.
I hear you, but there's the biggest thing on that. It's not just cost, which there is a large cost to this, and we were able to use CARES money, which we do not know if we're going to get any more of that or not. And we have to plan as if we are not.
The governor tells me, the newspaper tells me, let's assume the newspaper's right on this, that your governor's holding $1 billion of stimulus money now that he's not distributing locally. So maybe that could be a source of money for the local election boards.
And the second thing, which has nothing to do with money other than the local level, is the processing ability and the error rate we would see with manual processing, which we saw in many counties, but mainly the largest counties just because of the sheer volume. And that's something that we can't afford to see happen again, which is why the portal, which we may do a mailing to tell people to go to the portal to do it, to give them those directions, and also social media and television advertising is a potential for those. But we have to find a way to take that load off the counties because they would be physically, they were strained at 1.6 million. At 3 million, they'd be crushed. There's just no physical way for them to be able to do it.
But they're gonna be not possible to get those people in the precincts, is what we're also saying.
No, what I'm saying is we're going to have to find ways to get them in the precinct because we have to keep every bit of in-person voting available and as safe as we can, knowing we can't do the social distancing the way we would like.
Oh, sorry. Representatives Clark and Dempsey, y'all okay time-wise? You hanging in there? Okay, all right. We've got a few more questions here. Representative Rick Williams, and then Mary Frances Williams, and then we have Scott Turner, Representative Shannon, Representative Gullett, and Representative Burnell. And I'm going to try to lock it down after those questions, if y'all are okay answering those, and then we'll try to move on. Representative Rick Williams, you number 10 down there? 21. Yeah, close.
21.
That was close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, that's pretty close. We have, and I've, like Representative Gullett, worked as Chief Registrar 16 years and saw it from the time when you had to have a valid reason to get an absentee ballot to 45 days of early voting, then back down to 15 days. And I think we have just got to get the public to realize you don't have to wait till Election Day. Go early vote. In Baldwin County, our early voting was the largest precinct of that county. We had more early voters than we did people on Election Day. And we've got to get the message out to these people. Don't wait till Election Day. Go on early. And I'm just putting my 2 cents worth in. I've known Chris and all y'all for a long time, and I know you do a great job. And I know the training. I've been to the training and went through it. Lynn Bailey, back to Linda Beasley. And yeah, thank you for your work and keep it up. And let's try to get the public to understand. Don't wait till the last minute.
And the Secretary agrees with you, which is why it's point 4 in his November action plan.
Yeah.
And the other thing we got to avoid, and what we really need to focus on, is those first 2 weeks. What happens that last week and that last day, we all know what happens.
Yeah.
They get those 3-hour lines. Everybody's going to go do it on that Friday before to avoid the line on Tuesday.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Mary Frances Williams.
I just want to kind of piggyback on what Representative Williams and Representative Oliver have said. I think maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying about absentee ballots. It sounds like you're saying we can't do the number of absentee ballots we need to do because it's just too labor intensive. Maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but if absentee ballots is the way the public wants to go, then I think it's our job to figure out how to respond to what the public wants. And in Cobb County, there are many people who feel very strongly about absentee ballot is the safest way for them to vote. It's a big trend.
What I'm saying is the workload on the counties to process the applications without error is our biggest issue right now. Because to note that DeKalb County has had issues processing ballots, Fulton County has had issues processing ballots, Cobb County I'm sure had issues processing ballots. The sheer volume of manual ballot processing is the problem, which is why we're building out the portal to take away the manual processing issue from them. And moving forward in the runoff and the general, the ballot style combinations will go away as a problem that we would have had during the primary with the 36,000 ballot styles statewide. So we agree with you that we need to see more people early vote and absentee vote, but trying to do it through a manual paper absentee ballot application, either emailed or mailed in, would be next to impossible for the manpower and ability for most counties to handle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Turner.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I'm going to switch gears just for a second and talk a little bit about the vetting process for poll workers and some of the problems we did see in Fulton County. One of the more alarming set of testimony that we heard was from a young woman, and by no means am I trying to disparage the validity of her testimony, but she at one point did admit that she worked for one particular candidate. and was very proud of the fact that she worked for that candidate. She was hired the day before by an agency called Happy Faces to show up 19 hours before the polls opened. She was told to show up the day of the polls opening at 7, which means she would not have participated in any type of setup. And she was told to watch some videos in which she did not have access to anybody to answer questions, should she have, although she was very proud to say that she had a 100% score on her online testing. So it raised a lot of questions for me for a lot of different reasons. One is there something in the law that's lacking that would have some sort of vetting on the nature of the training, the background? Are they political activists with an agenda? Do they have a criminal history? Talking with my own elections office, they were not the beggar. They were in a beggar situation, and they could not be choosers in the people that they had. So could we talk a little bit about that process of selecting a poll worker and making sure they're on the up and up, and whether or not there needs to be legislation to address that?
The legal requirements are fairly simple. You have to be a minimum age 16. You have to be able to speak and read English. Right now you have to be a resident or otherwise employed by the county or municipality where you're going to be a poll worker. There is no type of vetting for absence of prejudice or absence of bias or absence of anything like that. The law prohibits any activity in a polling place along those lines. So if I were a poll worker and I supported candidate X, it would be my responsibility and the responsibility of the poll manager and the county that hired me to make sure that none of that comes through. And we do get complaints about that from time to time where citizens will call in and they'll say, hey, my poll manager's got a Joe Smith sign in his yard. That's not fair because he clearly supports Joe Smith and he's not going to be fair in doing it. Well, being a poll worker certainly doesn't obviate your First Amendment rights on personal free speech, and I suspect everybody would agree on that. The state law requires training. It doesn't require a specific amount of training, an X number of hours. Obviously, as you mentioned in your county, beggars can't be choosers. I had conversations with election directors throughout the state through February, March, and April, where they were literally in tears in some cases, that they were down in Claire Mosley in Early County. I got an email from her, and she said that she was down to one poll worker in the entire county. I talked to the people that were really in the meat of the COVID crisis down in Southwest Georgia and Dougherty County and Lee County. Talked to those election directors, and they were terrified. I mean, it was very different than it appeared up here in my perspective anyway. Counties, when this thing hit, and the governor, issued some directives and stuff, I went home and worked from home. I know a lot of other people did too. The counties couldn't do that. County election directors had to stay generally in their offices. They had to do things like process these absentee ballot applications that came in. They had to figure out a way to train their poll workers. We talked about Zoom training, which I think is generally more effective than just watching a video, if you can at least see it and have some interaction. And I think Mandy Smith in Forsyth County did that, and I think got pretty good results. I know other counties did too. But to get back to your question, there's not a specific test per se to check somebody's suitability to be a poll worker. It's been suggested that even the requirement that somebody be a county resident be changed so that you could do things like the Secretary mentioned, where if you get Rotary clubs or if you get service organizations that could, if you work down in downtown Atlanta but live in one of the suburbs, maybe an organization, a corporation, or a group could get together and work in Fulton County or work in DeKalb County, or work in Cobb County. They may be separated by that residency requirement if that stays. So that's one thing I think that actually is a lessening of a requirement that actually may yield better results. Because if you get good teams that work well together, you can put them together managing a polling place, and I think you can get some pretty good results.
Should there be additional requirements? Should there be a criminal background check?
Well, ultimately, I think that's a question for the legislature who makes those kind of laws. Personally, I don't think it's necessary to have a criminal history check in order to be a poll worker. That's my personal opinion.
Representative Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oop, sorry. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the issue of polls of voting locations being moved last minute and some voters not receiving notifications about poll location changes until after the election, which we did have happen. One of the poll managers testified last week that this was the first year that there was actually a contract between the location that the election is going to be held, and I guess the Secretary of State's office or maybe the county, a contract between someone about holding the election there. I just had a question around, is there anything in the contract that requires them to notify earlier that they are not going to be able to host the election? And are there any penalties for pulling out after you've said that you are going to host the election? I'm just trying to get at the last minute pullouts. Is there anything in the contract that helps with that?
Well,
Or can it be put in?
I'm sorry. First of all of those contracts or agreements are between the county and the entity that owns the polling place. None of that is part of the Secretary of State's responsibility. So it's not governed by any law. Now, there are laws that require county buildings to generally be made available to county elections offices. And actually, we made sure the counties were aware of that. And in some cases, we're successful to get the counties to where schools or other organizations, county buildings say, oh, no, we don't want you in here. We're able to trot out that code and say, well, the law says generally, unless it's going to severely impact your other services, you kind of got to do that. So we actually encouraged counties as much as they could to use that kind of low-hanging fruit where you're not going to have that. And I know there was some concern in different counties and different organizations about using schools or cleaning or sanitizing or something like that. So I think we did what we could to make sure the counties knew they kind of had that power behind them. They had the power of the law to say, unless you can tell me why you can't do this, you kind of have to. So I think that was helpful. As far as the rest of this stuff goes, it's just on an individual basis. But one thing I want to make sure that you guys really understand, because this really was an election unlike any other, and this is not in the excuse-making realm or anything like that. These counties, when this hit, I often talk about elections as being like a railroad. I mean, it's generally boring, uninteresting timeline where you start on this date and this happens and this happens, and it's designed to run very smoothly with gradual turns. Elections are not generally meant to be done on a Formula One track where you're making quick turns and quick stops and pivoting and doing things like changing absentee ballot processes. We had, for the first time in anyone's memory, possibly in history, 2 elections postponed, 2 elections combined, poll workers dropping like flies for out of concern for their own safety, which is completely reasonable. I'm not blaming elderly poll workers for not doing exactly what the governor and national officials are telling them not to do, which is don't go into public places and don't interact face-to-face and hand stuff back and forth. But these counties didn't have the option to go home. They didn't have the option to say, hey, sorry, we can't get poll workers. When I had calls and emails from counties saying, Chris, what am I going to do? I've lost 6 polling places today. Earlier this week on Monday, I said I was good, and now on Thursday, I've lost 4 polling places, and 25 of my poll workers, including whole poll teams, have quit. What am I going to do? Really, what I was able to tell them is try harder, which is a pretty bad thing to say. I mean, I couldn't send them poll workers. I couldn't manufacture people, and I can't build buildings. But to get back to Leader Trammell's question about a report card, with the vast majority of these counties, I'd give them an A. There's no question that they met the challenges, they rose above the challenges, they conducted successful elections, people voted, they operated the equipment. Yes, there were some problems. We're working specifically on those problems with the folks that are responsible, but I think it would be a mistake to leave this hearing and not mention the heroic nature of the vast majority of county election officials and just about every person that showed up to the polls. I mean, probably 10,000 people showed up to the polls in a pandemic, knowing that they were going to come face to face with people that could possibly get them sick and impact their health. So I think that's an important message to say also.
So just a follow-up question to clarify. So take out the county locations, but let's say, for example, a church. Is there anything in the contract, and you can just say you don't know if you don't know the contracts, but is there anything in the contract that requires them to give like a week notice if, why are you, excuse me, hold on, why are you laughing?
You know what I'm saying? I have no idea.
Before that, you were sort of laughing. I mean, these are serious issues, so,
No, I'm asking this thing, I have no idea.
okay. Because we might want to look into having to give earlier notice so that it's not so much stress on the poll managers, you know, last minute to try to find a place and send out notification.
I don't know about any specific contracts, but there's nothing in law that would penalize somebody or force them to stay in a contract other than in a civil matter.
Thank you.
Representative Gullett? Oh, you waved, okay. Representative Brunel, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. I know that you all feel like you all did the best job you possibly could, but even with that, and even if you're saying it's the county issue, at the end of the day, Georgians don't trust our election process. We've had 2 different major elections where we became national news, and they don't trust it. That's why they come on. That's why they really come on election day. They don't trust that their ballots are going to be the absentee ballots are going to go in, and so what are we going to do for that? For those they don't trust, because at the end of the day, we have to be able to our people that come and elect us and come and vote. We have to do something to help them trust the process, and they don't trust you all. I mean, I hear it all the time, and even there's some elected officials that don't trust. So what are we going to do for the state of Georgia? So on November the 3rd, nobody's looking at us where we look really, really crazy for once again not having an election process that our people in Georgia, because Georgians really deserve better. And I just think that you all really have to look at yourself. I mean, it's nice to give yourself an A. I can give myself an A. But at the end of the day, when we go home, we have to look at ourselves and really figure out what are we going to do collectively to make sure that those people that are coming to vote, that they trust the process and they trust that their vote will be counted the right way.
Well, first of all, just to be clear, I was talking about the county election officials when I was singing their praises. I wasn't singing my own praises I think our office performed admirably. I know there are some people that may not agree with that. I think we reacted the same way as best we could under difficult circumstances. But to answer your question, a couple things. First of all, I'd point out that every election we've had in the last 3 or 4 years, the major elections, we've broken records for voter turnout and voter participation. That tells me that something is going right. Now, when you have that happening, you have more people involved, that's a good thing. It is going to stress the system. The system that we've been working with for 16 years operated in one way. It was fairly static. When you add the elements that we've added now, it expands. I wonder how many county offices, county commissions have expanded funding for election office to get them more people so that they can meet some of these challenges. I would hope that there would be a recognition that if they're doing record-breaking work, they need some backup. And I'm not casting stones at anybody. The other thing I'd say specifically is if people want to trust, and this is what I said, I was the chief investigator for 8 years before I became the election director, and I said, if you want to learn about absentee ballot or election fraud or malfeasance or anything like that, the best thing to do, one, is to learn the rules, and the second thing is become a poll worker. So what I would say is if people are interested, if people don't trust, call your county election office and sign up to be a poll worker. Learn how to operate the equipment. Learn what the equipment does and doesn't do. I would hope that you would all go back to your constituencies and say, hey guys, if you're concerned about elections, here's the number for your county election office. Get churches, get organizations, get civic groups to go in together and say, hey, I've got 10 people in my club or my organization. We'd like to adopt a polling place. We live in this part of the county, in this part of the town, and we're ready, willing, and able. We'll do as much training as you want, and we want to make sure this gets done right. That's what I would say we, the entire state of Georgia, needs and deserves, is for everyone to get involved and realize this really is a we situation. And the more of us that get involved, become a poll worker. learn how this stuff operates, and realize that, hey, when I operate this equipment, this is how I know that somebody can't come in and vote, 6 times because of this issue. Or if there's a concern about some equipment or some technology, this is how this stuff works. I'm going to call my county office and I'm going to say, hey, I'm concerned about people voting absentee ballots. I'm concerned about the ability for you guys to process these absentee ballots. I'm going to either work or I'm going to volunteer, and I'm going to come in on weekends and I'm going to help with the process. Because it's the county workers that are being buried under this stuff. They're the ones that are having to make these adjustments. They're doing a great job, but they need help. So that's my solution.
Can I ask one more question? Okay, I appreciate that answer, but at the end of the day, who's going to pay for, are you all going to give the budget for those? Because that was one of the questions that came up last week, was that those that were overwhelmed by counting the absentee ballots, they didn't have any extra money. So who's going to give them the money to for all these extra people?
Well, the people that have the money, the people that appropriate the money, I guess, could do that. Now, I'll point out that in terms of money, we had, 4 grant programs that we provided to the counties where they could get reimbursed at a high rate for security, for handicap accessibility, for new equipment modifications, for personal protective equipment expenditures. So we were able to rebate about $20,000, if everybody maxed it out, about $20,000 per county to recover some of these costs. So it's not perfect. It doesn't make everything great. But again, I would say the same thing I said before about being a poll worker. If elections are as important as I think everyone in this room and hopefully everybody that's watching this believes, it's time to get serious about them and say, hey, this is what we need. Go to your county election office and say, how many people do you think you're going to need if you're going to have to process 50,000 absentee ballots? How long is that going to take, and how many people do you need to do it? And say, in a small county with a 2 or 3 person office, the number is going to be different, but the scale is going to be the same. And say, what do you need so that you can make sure that every voter gets their absentee ballot, that something doesn't get missed, that you don't develop a backlog so that people are getting it late. I suspect if you went to every county, or most counties in the state, and said, could you have used more people? Could you have used more space? Could you have used more stuff? Many of them probably would have said yes. Again, unprecedented situations, and again, not dodging, not making excuses, but absentee ballots by mail had gone from 5%, which had been the norm, 5 to 7% to 50%, which is something that we have to recognize is something that we're living with in this COVID world, and it is going to be something to deal with. And regardless of whether the Secretary of State's office sends out applications to people, there's nothing that would prevent a county office from sending out applications. There's nothing that would prevent a private organization from sending out absentee ballot or promoting absentee ballot voting. The other thing that I think the portal would do that Mr. Sterling spoke about, that would give us and everyone else visibility into how much is being done. And if there was a huge backlog, if you saw that somebody had requested an absentee ballot, in early October, and you're in, late October and nothing had been done, everybody could see that.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been sitting here listening, and we had a meeting before this, and I'm having a little trouble myself understanding all of the issues. I represent 3 rural counties. We're not wealthy counties. We didn't have a fraction of the issues that I'm hearing here. And I want to know, were you, as House representatives, ever in contact with your election officials? I was, constantly, and I knew. Did they not tell you there were issues or they had problems? We had the same thing. We had to combine 2 precincts. We had a brand new center that we had for our elections office moved, all during this time. We were able to complete our elections. No one was without a vote. Every vote counted. I feel like we're pointing fingers everywhere. This is a county obligation. You need to talk to your Board of Commissioners and your election officials. It's funded at the county level. My little old counties, they knew enough to go for the grants if they needed it. They knew to get the poll workers, and if they didn't have enough, guess what? They had extras. And did somebody try to plug it in and know it was upside down? Yes. But these are things that need to be done at the county level. This goes back on our local folks to get it done. And I think every one of us in here, when we leave here in a couple of days, we need to touch base, go to your election people, find out what they need, and work through it that way. That's where it is. It's not, we don't vote in Atlanta. I vote in Thomasville. That's where it's going to be. That's where the rubber meets the road. And I really feel like we need to take part of that as our responsibility to see that our counties have what they need. Thank you for what you've done. I realize how monumental this was, and everything that could have gone wrong probably did. A pandemic, relocating, everything that you could think of. But if my counties can do it, so can the others. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their questions and their comments regarding the Secretary of State's office. Is there anything, any brief, comments that y'all would like to add to the end? A minute or less, please, if you will. No?
We're good, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, Mr. Sterling and Mr. Harvey, we appreciate your attendance. Thank you for answering our questions. I can't guarantee that we won't ask for you back at some point in the future, but we are grateful for the time you spent answering our questions today, and we look forward to working on this together. Again, I know it is easy to get passionate regarding elections, and we certainly have a tendency to run off in our corners and talk about the parties that we represent, but we really want the same things. We want this to be a very fair and a very simple process, and that's what we're all working towards. So thank you again. And members of the committee, we have two other bits of testimony this afternoon. They have stayed for a long period of time. And I will let y'all decide who would like to speak with us first. I don't think it'll take very long, if I may beg your indulgence for just a few more minutes. These two ladies have both asked in advance if they could give a little bit of time with the committee to discuss elections.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Chair Lady Dempsey.
I can be brief.
Please.
And give a little bit of an overview, and if y'all think you're going to have another meeting, I'll be glad to come back and give a little more detail. How would that be?
That would be great. We may have to get back. Well, we will have to get back together at some point. So please go ahead. The floor is yours, Madam Chair.
I'm just going to say I think this was a hard time for everyone. We all can recognize that, and that with some of the new machines, with different things that were going on with illness, it was hard. It was just hard. But I want y'all to know that no one could be more surprised than I was when we got multiple ballots at our house, ballot requests, the applications. So in a very unique way, 3 landed on the same day to my home address. 2 for my husband, differences in the name and the number, the registration number, but same address. Now, realistically, there could be a son there with a similar name, but they were different. I received one that same day. We waited a little bit, hoping that we could go vote in person, but we did decide a few weeks later to mail it in. And I can come back, like I say, and give you the dates on this and help you a little better more with the timeline. But as we got close to the election, I also received another application for a ballot very close to the election. I would say it was about the, let's see if I have the date on here, maybe the very end of May, I think May 27th or so. It went to my UPS box. So not my home address, my name, UPS box. I didn't send that application in, of course. It was very close to the election. But I did, a few days before the election on the 4th, receive a ballot to that address. So there were some very unusual things that were happening. I have spoken immediately when the first 3 arrived. I spoke with the Secretary of State. I spoke with the Deputy Secretary after that. We talked. An investigator has been in touch with me. And Chris Harvey has also been in touch with me. It's not that it's ignored, but it's a scenario that I want y'all to understand, because I think we all care very much that real ballots are received and mailed and returned in appropriate ways. And when you have numerous ballot applications come, it would be very easy to vote several times. So I've had some answers to it. I don't feel completely great about the answers. It's kind of like a lot of things. When you start asking questions, you find out more and more. I do think there's much work to be done, and I do think that there are some things that this committee can stand strongly for to do that. I would like to come back and give you those details. Just a couple of things to sort of plant also for you to think is the reality that because of this, I did work closely with my own election supervisor there and feel like he was very forthright. We spent a lot of time on the phone because I wanted to make sure that we could actually both go vote since we had not received those actual ballots back that we applied for. I wanted to ask that question as some of my constituents were asking too. Do I have to surrender the ballot? So Robert Braid and I had a great conversation about that. My husband went and voted. We had voted also in the presidential primary. We did that on the Saturday. In my community, we voted on Saturday, the 14th of March. It was the very last day. After that, everything closed down because we were closing down as well. We were the only people in there. There wasn't a crowd. But when we went to get our actually show up for early voting, separately, not together, we each received another opportunity to vote for the presidential election. So somehow our votes did or didn't count. Somehow they were or were not credited to us. Perhaps we voted 4 times. Perhaps we didn't. I'm not real sure, but it's something that I'd really like when we're not in a push and everybody's exhausted to come back and talk with y'all about. One other thing I'll leave you with too is that in the conversation yesterday afternoon too with Chris Harvey, he was kind enough to really answer a lot of them. And there may be reasonable answers to this. It just feels very unusual, I would say. He shared with me my signatures because they are different. They're a little bit different. And we moved about 3 years ago. We'd lived in one place for 40-something years. So we moved and had to change our address. So my original license probably had one signature and this one was a little different. Same name, but all done with that hand sort of thing that you take your finger and you swipe and do. And that is what I discovered yesterday for the first time. That would be our check on what your signature is. And I don't know about y'all, but when I looked at these two, I thought, wait a minute, my real signature doesn't look a bit like my finger signing something. So there are some things that I think this process, as challenging as it was at times, I think we have an opportunity here. Some things are gonna come forward, some ways we can all work together and help to make this a much better, truly transparent process. So that's my goal, and I hope we can talk more about it.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you for staying late, and thank you. We will revisit this. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Representative Dempsey, thanks. And Representative Clark, we'll turn it over to you, ma'am.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank you to the members of the committee that have stayed this long. I will try not to take up too much of your time, but I think it's really important to tell the story of what happened in Gwinnett, as it's not Fulton, as we kept hearing today. And I just want people to know that I think there are things that were happening across the board. So Gwinnett County, is the second largest county in the state. Before I go through everything, I just want to recognize that, yes, we are in a pandemic. And that presented a unique set of circumstances, some of them unpredictable. Given this reality, I do believe that it is incumbent on all of us, Secretary of State, the county level, us as state representatives, leaders in our community, to acknowledge what went wrong, evaluate why it went wrong, and then strategize how we fix the issues before November. On the morning of June 9th, just before 7 a.m., I received a phone call from a constituent. Frantic, she was calling to let me know that she checked MVP in the morning and it showed that she had been purged and that she needs to register to vote. This did not make sense to her as she had voted in the midterm election. So I went and tried to log on to MVP myself, and I also got a notification that I was not found and that I needed to register to vote. The first thing I did was I reached out to both of my contacts in the Secretary of State's office. They let me know that they were aware of the issue and they were working to resolve it. They got it resolved pretty quickly at about 7:35 a.m. And so I thank them for moving very quickly on that, but I want to acknowledge that people use MVP on the morning of Election Day to know where they are going, and the system going down right as polls are opening is an issue that needs to be addressed going forward. Almost immediately after the issue had reached a resolution, I got another call, this time from a constituent. Her polling precinct did not have any voting machines. Poll officials were offering provisional ballots, but it was unclear whether those votes would actually count as a normal ballot or as a provisional ballot. The Secretary of State's office and the other people that were up here speaking said the exact same thing. I went to one of those polling places that did not have any machines and witnessed with my own eyes voters leaving without casting a ballot because they did not want to cast a provisional ballot. They do not trust that process. They were not sure or ensured that the ballots would even be counted as normal. And secondly, I watched with my own eyes voting machines being delivered to the precinct 1 hour and 20 minutes after the polling place had already opened. They were pulling into the parking lot. Later in the day, I received multiple reports of machines down, scanners malfunctioning, the cards that go into the machine not working, and poll workers being just unsure about how to deal with voters whose absentee ballots never came. And speaking of absentee ballots, Gwinnett County received over 86,000 absentee ballots. Despite the major delays in ballots being mailed to voter, which in and of itself is a major issue that needs to be addressed as well, I would affirm that many registered voters heeded to the call and decided to vote from home in Gwinnett. We knew the number of absentee ballots requested. We also had a reasonable gauge of how many ballots had been cast. Absentee ballots had been cast. So it isn't unconscionable that we did not have an adequate number of high-volume absentee ballot scanners from the state and that it took over a week to count all of those ballots. One issue with this was the process. It is my understanding that due to memory issues with the computers, absentee ballots had to first be separated by precincts before they were scanned. This process is laborious and vulnerable to error. And lastly, the ballot scanning errors also need to be addressed. We have evidence from multiple counties, large and small, that the high-volume scanners have skipped races that were clearly marked. This issue was caught by the audit mark software and cannot be simply explained by contrast settings. That would make sense if the entire ballot was not counted, but it does not make sense when the software clearly marks some races as voted, some races as aberrations, and some races as unvoted on the same ballot when they were all marked the same way. When made aware of the issues, the Secretary of State's office wrote the concerns off as activists with an axe to grind. I'm disturbed by legitimate voting anomalies being ignored due to who makes the Secretary of State's office aware. Whether an activist or not an activist, whether a Democrat or a Republican, any Georgian who raises concerns about the integrity of our elections should have the full ear of the Secretary of State's office. This is fundamental to a functional democratic process. So I'll leave you all with this, reiterating that I understand that June 9th presented some unique circumstances. But there were also some predictable issues that the state and local governments administering elections should have anticipated and prepared for. We are just over 4 months away from the November general election. We are very much still in a pandemic, and the likelihood that the threats of coronavirus will still be present in November is very high. We must acknowledge the issue, evaluate what went wrong, and seek solutions to ensure that this process is equitable across the state, so that voters in Fulton and Gwinnett have the same experience as voters in some of the smaller rural counties when they are casting their ballot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Representative Clark. You brought up an issue or two I would like to talk with you a little bit further at some point, if that's at all possible. I appreciate you waiting us out and hanging in there with us until this late hour. Would remind everyone that while we are taking scheduled testimony in person and via Zoom, we are also taking written testimony at the Governmental Affairs website is gaff@house.ga.gov. Is that correct? Thanks again to the staff. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us today. Does anybody have anything further? Any business before the committee? Hearing, we will be looking at Senate Bill 463 in the morning at 8 o'clock. So thank you all once again for your time today. We'll see you in the morning. We stand adjourned.